Hello and welcome to Mary Live. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle. I would like to begin this program, which is going to again discuss the recent DDF document on Our Lady, Mater Populi Fidelis, with a statement from the document on the ecclesial vocation of the theologian. This is Donum Veritatis. This is also written by the very same congregation, at that time the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, in 1990. And this is about the role of a theologian in trying to be of service to the magisterium. And so I want to quote from number 30, because this is very much within the spirit and the obedience with which I am pursuing to offer some suggestions for clarification, for modification regarding this document of the DDF. This is number 30. It says, quote, "The theologian has the duty to make known to the magisterial authorities the problems raised by the teaching in itself, in the arguments proposed to justify it, or even in the manner in which it is presented. He should do this in an evangelical spirit and with a profound desire to resolve the difficulties. His objections could then contribute to real progress and provide a stimulus to the magisterium to propose the teaching of the church in greater depth and with a clearer presentation of the arguments." My friends, I can't say how much how emphatically I commit myself to this statement, and with the intention of both greater clarity, greater explanation regarding Our Lady as it is presented in this DDF document, and also ultimately at the service of the church. This is my heartfelt desire and my disposition, where we will now enter what I consider to be some significant issues that need both clarification and modification with this DDF document. I also want to briefly refer to the Second Vatican Council's teaching on Our Lady. It's Lumen Gentium number 54. This is something you can quickly and easily Google. But it states very clearly that Vatican II did not intend to, quote, give a complete doctrine on Mary, end quote, and that it leaves it for theologians to further clarify elements that are being taught in Catholic schools about her. Well, this is very clearly referring to her teachings, and anybody who's familiar with the history and the recent history of this discussion, the elements of Our Lady as co-redemptrix, mediatrix of all graces, because those were the hot topics through the 40s and 50s leading up to the council, and various German and Austrian theologians in particular, also Belgian theologians, thought that as the magisterium had presented it, it was not clear, and therefore part of the debate that went on at the Second Vatican Council was, for example, not to use mediatrix of all graces and not to use the title of co-redemptrix, as it stated clearly in the 1962 Prenotanda, the prenote, saying because, quote, absolutely true in themselves, but could be easily misunderstood by the separated brethren, the Protestants. So the council is saying that it did not present a complete doctrine on Mary. We can either take them for their word, or we can disagree and say, no, we think that it did put forward a complete doctrine on Mary. But it's the only place in the council where it clearly says that's not the council's intention, is to give a complete doctrine on Mary. Where then do we find the complete doctrine of Mary? Well, one last reference, bear with me. This is Lumen Gentium 25, and this is where the council speaks about a religious assent of mind and will to the manifest mind of the Pope, even when he's not speaking ex cathedra, that is to say, even when he's not making an infallible statement. The document, the paragraph 25, goes on to say that you evaluate the level of authority to some degree based on the nature of the document, the mode of expression. So, for example, as we've talked about before, the ordinary mouthpiece, the ordinary expression of papal ordinary magisterium teaching is the encyclical, but it also can be with repetition in other things like apostolic letters, audiences, addresses, homilies. And so these have to be taken into consideration when we talk about levels of the magisterium's teaching, and also appropriate levels of responding to those. And therefore, as a clear example, if you have a papal encyclical teaching by a Holy Father compared to a note from a doctrinal dicastery, obviously the higher level of an encyclical has to be the primary source whereby the faithful give a religious assent of mind and will. It is said that a doctrinal note which has the approval of the Pope to be distributed, but not signed, let alone directly from the Pope, is somewhere around the fourth tier, sometimes called the lowest potential tier of authority. It doesn't take away the reality that it was, in fact, approved for distribution. It's only to get our categories right according to what the Second Vatican Council teaches us. So, having said that, I want to point out three areas in the document which I believe to be significantly lacking in presenting the whole Catholic truth about Our Lady. Once again, where do we get the whole Catholic truth on Our Lady? From classic and repeated, consistent papal magisterial teachings. That's where we ultimately must give a religious assent of mind and will to the manifest mind of the Pope, even when he's not speaking infallibly. And that means it's critically important that we know what is consistent papal teaching on Our Lady. I want to say, just by way of comment, in some of the other commentaries on this DDF document, Mater Populi Fidelis, that sometimes I've heard comments like, well, yes, it's not in favor of the titles, but it still conveys the doctrines. I think we have to re-examine that statement, and several podcasters who have previously defended Our Lady's title and role as co-redemptrix have now said, well, we can remove the title, but the doctrine was clearly articulated in the document. I would say we have to take perhaps a closer look at that and at that statement. So quite frankly, if one was unaware of what the Papal Magisterium has taught for the last 3 centuries and going into a 4th about Our Lady's role in the redemption and her consequent and causal effect on her universal mediation of all graces, then when you read the DDF document as it presently stands and one says, well, it clearly teaches that Mary is spiritual mother and that she's intercessor. And that would be true. But to say that that's the full, authentic papal magisterial teaching on Our Lady would not be true. She is not simply an advocate. She's not simply an intercessor. And her spiritual motherhood is the fruit of her unique role with and under Jesus in the redemption. So we have to be clear about what is lacking in the document, I believe, so that we can perhaps pray and perhaps ask for greater clarification or for greater modification of the document to be more in line with consistent, repeated, perennial papal magisterial teaching. And I would say this, again, with due respect to the document, but when, for example, it quotes in full the extempore comments of Pope Francis, God rest his soul, if you look at the videos, if you check the sources, you will see that These were comments that were off the cuff, so to speak. What does that mean? It means it wasn't even in the texts that he was reading. One was during a Wednesday audience. The other was during a spontaneous homily he gave on the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so going back to Lumen Gentium 25, the manner of expression makes a difference about the level of authority. Is it still commentary from the Pope? Absolutely. But does it rank with the consistent papal magisterial teaching that has especially brought to a fruition with St. John Paul II in things like encyclical teaching by doctrine, addresses, written homilies? No, you would not say that those are comparative in terms of the authority, I think, with a proper understanding of Lumen Gentium 25, let alone quoting a cardinal interview in a secular dimension. Well, that technically doesn't have any magisterial authority because it's done in a mode of a secular interview. So I hope these are helpful in terms of principles by which we understand the nature of the document and the level of the document in terms of authority, especially in relation to 3 centuries and really ongoing to a 4th century of papal magisterial repeated consistent teaching. That's where you go if you want full Catholic authentic teaching on Our Lady. So let me bring forward just 3 examples of where I think there are doctrinal issues, concerns with this new DDF document. And once again, I've done a series of commentaries, which you can get on motherofallpeoples.com. I don't want to go forward and repeat all those for those who have already seen that. But one, a brief commentary on the document as it came out. And then secondly, pointing out some other areas of concern with the document. So with those as a background, 3 elements. Number 1, the teaching in the document regarding the role of Our Lady in redemption. Now, what does it say? It does say that Mary had an active role in the redemption. And it emphasizes the Annunciation, which theologically was always called remote co-redemption. That is to say, it's true, but it's distant. Okay. What has the consistent papal magisterium said for, again, 3+ centuries on what precisely her active role in the redemption is? Because this is not consistently taught in this new Vatican document. It is, as Pius XI beautifully explained in an address he gave, that, and he's truly explaining and defending the specific title of co-redemptrix. This is in his 1935 address. He says, literally, we could not but call her co-redemptrix because A, of her unique role in giving birth to our Redeemer, and B, I'm putting the A's and B's, and B, because of her suffering with Jesus under the cross. So this calls the question. It's one thing to use the expression, Mary's role in the redemption. It's another thing to say what precisely that is that makes it unique. I mean, quite frankly, when you talk about a unique role in redemption, that could be ascribed to many people. You could say that to, realizing this is analogy, but for the sake of clarity, to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate had a unique role in the redemption. So did Caiaphas. So did the Romans. So to say that it's unique does not say that it's necessarily redemptive, that it actually is a contribution to the redemption of all humanity. But that's precisely what St. John Paul teaches, and Pius the Ninth, Leo the 13th, Pius the 10th, Benedict the 15th, who literally says, we may rightly say that together with Christ, Mary redeemed the human race. That's what's been brought forward and really capsized, brought to fruition, argued in a summit fashion by St. John Paul II. St. John Paul II says, for example, not in extempore comments, not in side comments on a spontaneous homily, but in the apostolic letter, Salvifici Dolores, that Mary's suffering was a contribution to the redemption of us all. That, my friends, is what the Church has perennially taught regarding Mary's unique role in the redemption. So to say she has a unique role in the redemption, to say she has an active role in the redemption, is insufficient if you're trying to present the full Catholic papal magisterial teaching. And that's my first concern with this document. There are references to her active role, but the document does not specify that Mary's co-suffering with Jesus, co means with, that Mary's suffering with the Redeemer was also objectively a contribution to the redemption of every single human being. Theologically, Pope St. Pius X, in an encyclical, mind you, in an encyclical, specified that while Jesus's merits are called de condigno in strict right, because he's the God-man, Mary's merits, and the document seems to underplay, if not reject, even the concept of human merit, which is a very serious issue in light of the Council of Trent, but that Mary's merits are what's called de congruo, a fittingness, that God was the one who determined that she was to be predestined to be an integral part of the work of redemption. When she said yes to that, when she suffered for that, she received merit, and it was a contribution to the redemption of all of us. That's the classic Catholic doctrine that's not included in this document in any consistent fashion. There's one brief reference that she suffered and offered, but it doesn't say that it was redemptive. You could say the same about John the Apostle, Mary Magdalene. They could have suffered and offered, but they were not the new Eve with Christ, the new Adam. They were not the human being, the immaculate human being that God chose to be part of the redemptive process. And in that fashion, it's not sufficient to simply say, they state that, it's always opportune to use the co-redemptrix title, which is a bit of a challenging kind of universal statement. They have to use the term co-redemptrix many times, even to say that it's inopportune. Does that mean when John Paul II used it, he was inopportune? Mother Teresa, and we've talked about this before, but it's a bit of a vague, kind of all-encompassing statement that would say anytime anyone's even discussing the issue, which is still in its third week, ubiquitous in world discussion, that anytime anybody uses the title, they're kind of being disobedient. Remember, the title co-redemptrix is not a swear word. There's no condemned books, and even with taking the counsel of the DDF in saying it should not be used, it's inopportune. Although quite frankly, there's a translation problem. Half the languages say inappropriate, the other half say inopportune, which is something that also would be called for clarification. There's a big difference between inopportune and inappropriate. Be that as it may, we have to use the term to discuss the term in the proper concept of the synodality that we've been called over and over and over to practice. Let us please incorporate this legitimate call for synodality. And so that means discussion, and that's, again, the authentic spirit in which I'm bringing up what I see to be doctrinal deficiencies, not just a inappropriate reference to the title, but an understatement of what specifically Mary offers in the redemption. And that's being the mother of the Redeemer and a lifetime of suffering with Jesus, which was brought to fruition, to a climactic moment at Calvary, which was part of what theologically we call objective redemption, the historic obtaining, acquisition of the graces of the redemption by Jesus, the new Adam, the only divine and human Redeemer, and secondarily by Mary, the immaculate human being that God the Father wanted to be part of this process to show all humanity that our suffering is also redemptive. So that's area one that I think is in serious need of modification if we're seeking to reflect the full Catholic doctrine on Mary's unique role in the redemption. Those are simply words unless they're filled with the fact that her role was uniquely redemptive with Jesus as a contribution to us all. It somewhat calls the question, what new insight has happened, for example, since the pontificate of St. John Paul II? It's not like a new Dead Sea Scroll has been discovered. What has led to this de-emphasis on her subordinate role in the redemption? Is there been a new great theological breakthrough? Well, it seems to have been solely motivated through an ecumenical cause. The ecumenical cause is critical for all of us. But again, St. John Paul II prohibits, he even mocks in a certain sense, any idea that we reach Christian unity through dilution, minimalization of the truth about Mary. It's in his document Ut Unum Sint on authentic Catholic ecumenism. And as many commentators have said, it doesn't look like the Protestant communities have raised this issue as the single issue keeping them from becoming Catholic, and also the fact that there doesn't seem to be any testimony that finally now Protestants are ready to jump into the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. There may be individuals, but it certainly is not part of the major discussion that all of a sudden this was the great obstacle. Now, with the DDF document, now we're ready to enter the fullness of the church. That does not seem to be the objective situation. Second area of deep concern is the treatment on mediatrix of all graces. Now, I have mentioned this in the last two commentaries, so I don't want to be redundant, but let me just say clearly, the DDF document is contradicting when it says that Mary and no creature can have a secondary causality in the distribution of graces. This is not just a de-emphasis. This has every appearance of being a direct denial of the teaching of the papal encyclical teaching of 4 centuries. Again, fortunately, this debate has caused many people to articulate these things. The quotes are out there. I won't take 10 minutes and read them all to you, but they're simply there. Take a look at the repeated papal teachings that each and every grace of the redemption comes to us from Jesus through the mediation of Mary. I again will refer to, because Cardinal Ratzinger is so strongly quoted in the document, I will refer to his quote as Pope Benedict on May 11, 2007, with the canonization of the Franciscan Brazilian priest, Father Galvio, when he says that there's no fruit of grace in the history of salvation that does not come to us except through the necessary instrumentality of the mediation of Mary. This is Pope Benedict, who's so often quoted as saying to be against the doctrine of mediatrix of all graces. Well, he used the title mediatrix of all graces, and he taught the doctrine using theological terms, causality, instrumentality. And this directly contradicts the document. And if somehow that is an unjust reading, all the more reason for clarification that the DDF, because it does say it 3 times in different forms. This is why you have real confusion and sadness from so many Marian organizations throughout the world. I can testify that several countries and leaders from several countries have stated, and of course this is not inside information, you can see this as well, people like the Legion of Mary. There's arguably about 10 million members of the Legion of Mary. They have at least 10 times in their manual the reference to Mary's mediatrix of all graces. You have St. Maximilian Kolbe's profound teaching with the Militia Immaculate, which is based on mediatrix of all graces. We have the whole concept of Marian consecration by St. Louis Marie de Montfort, which is based on Mary as mediatrix of all graces. I had a woman ask me last week, should I no longer give the fruit of my good works according to St. Louis Marie de Montfort's consecration? Should I no longer give this to Our Lady because she can't mediate graces anymore? Can we please acknowledge the global confusion this document has put forward? It's interesting because journalists, even secular journalists, are acknowledging this. Journalists I've talked to from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from Newsmax, as well as international testimonies are saying people are saddened and confused. So if we do want to listen with an authentic pastoral sensitivity to the holy people of God, they're expressing their confusion and their sadness over this document. I actually find that among the common faithful, and I mean that term with the greatest of respect, there has been such a heart reaction, I would say a gut reaction, and understanding that, in fact, apart from all the theological articulations and edgings of this, that this document does in fact de-emphasize the doctrinal truth about Our Lady. Once again, if you're from a perspective of saying that Mary's only a spiritual mother and an intercessor, of course you won't have a problem with the document. But then you have a problem, or there's a gap with a full Catholic understanding by papal teaching of the fact that Mary uniquely participated in the redemption with and under Jesus at the will of God the Father through giving birth to the Redeemer and through suffering with him and offering him his suffering, her suffering along with him for objective redemption, for the historic achievement of redemption. So mediatrix of all graces is a very serious issue, and it is causing great confusion. And once again, I would say a good reason for clarification or modification of this teaching. Third point and final point, I think properly understood, the document is putting into question the Catholic concept of redemption. Now, that's a big statement, so let me explain in what way I mean this document puts in question the Catholic concept of redemption. So we hear throughout the document the clear truth that Jesus Christ is our only divine Redeemer and mediator. Praise God. Thank you. That's so clearly, emphatically true, and we all have to confirm that. But the next question is, does it reflect the authentic Catholic teaching? For example, general Christianity believes that. Protestant Christianity believes that. So there's nothing explicitly Catholic about that, although it's the foundation of truth upon which the church builds. What is the authentic Catholic position on redemption? That it was the will of God that two people would be critical participants in this historic work. First of all, in an absolute, infinite, undeniable way, the foundation for all others to have any cooperation, participation, is our Lord Jesus Christ. Absolutely true. And the new Eve, and Mary. Remember, the Catholic Church is not an either-or church. It's not a sola church. It's not a sola Christus church. It's not a sola fide church. It's not a sola gratia church. It's a both-and church. And so in this context, it is not just Jesus, because his redemption is so perfect. God wanted a human being to participate in it. My friends, this is 2nd century Mariology. I'm not exaggerating. This is St. Irenaeus, which many people have quoted. St. Irenaeus in the 2nd century, who's a doctor of the church. You see, we've got to have some consistency. If we're calling these people doctors of the church, like St. Irenaeus, in the 2nd century, and Cardinal Newman in the 21st century, and they're defending Mary's unique role in the redemption, Newman using the title co-redemptrix and defending it, Irenaeus saying that she's the cause of salvation for herself and the whole human race. We simply can't reconstruct Catholic history for ecumenical reasons. Perhaps it's dominated by ecumenical reasons. We don't judge hearts. We don't, for a moment, think we can read them. But that seems to be the motivation. This is classic Catholic teaching, that God wanted a woman. So, as the fathers of the church say, grace was lost through a man, a woman, and a tree. Grace was restored in a manifestation of the omnipotence of God the Father through a man, a woman, and a tree. Jesus, the new Adam, as St. Paul so clearly teaches. Mary, the new Eve. And remember, when Irenaeus describes Mary's role as the new Eve, it has a secondary instrumental causality, just like Pope Benedict said. A secondary instrumental causality. What does that mean? It means she's not central, she's not first, she's not the formal cause, if you want to use theology, but she's an instrumental cause. I find it fascinating. No one denies that Eve was an instrumental cause in the loss of grace. So how can we deny what the early church taught over and over and over again, that Mary is the secondary instrumental cause? That's why St. Irenaeus uses the word cause. He doesn't say, just complement. He doesn't say, a nice afterthought. Cause of salvation for herself and the whole human race. And then you go to the 5th century and you have liturgies, Armenian, Orthodox, Coptic liturgies calling Mary the liberatrix and salvatrix. Also the Akathist hymn saying, Mother of God, save us. Then we go to the 10th century and we have John the Geometer, who says there's an inseparability between Jesus and Mary in the accomplishment of the redemption at Calvary, not just at the Annunciation, but at Calvary. Then we have Bernard and his disciple Arnold of Chartres, saying that redemption was accomplished by two people, Jesus and his mother. That's why Arnold of Chartres talks about Mary being co-crucified in her heart, that she co-died with Jesus in her heart. When the DDF document says that this became a thesis, and it talks about this with mediation too, more around the 17th century, or there was a correction in the 15th century. That's not historically accurate. This goes on very clearly, both co-redemptrix and mediatrix of all graces, through the medieval theology. Look at the churches, my friends. Go into a basilica. Go into a great cathedral, in one of the great European cathedrals. When you see the mother in the back, hugely present, and there's oftentimes priests and saints under her. That's the teaching of St. Bernard of Clairvaux, that she's the mediatrix. And for Bernard, it wasn't just advocate. It was that she was the mediator between the Trinity and humanity. We can't reconstruct the teaching of he who is called, by the way, the doctor of Marian mediation. not just intercession, not just advocacy. So there's got to be an integrity as we describe these things. And so when Salmeron in the 16th century, one of the seven principal Jesuits, original Jesuits, defends Our Lady's role as co-redemptrix and mediatrix and advocate, that's important. This all leads up to the papal treatment. By the way, the document also, it has to be pointed out, it says lex orandi, lex oranda, lex credendi, which is absolutely true. As we pray, so we believe. But its point is trying to say that mediatrix can be used in certain dimensions, but not mediatrix of all graces. Well, when it refers to the feast, the liturgical feast granted by Pope Benedict XV on Our Lady, it's the mediatrix of all graces. And unfortunately, the document says it's the feast of Mary Mediatrix. Well, that would serve their conclusion of saying we should only use mediatrix, but it's not true. It's an incorrect reference. The feast is the feast of Mary Mediatrix of all graces, which means lex orandi, lex credendi supports this universality. So I want to conclude by saying I do think that the authentic Catholic teaching that we were redeemed by Jesus Christ, absolutely fundamentally, in every conceivable way, as many modifiers as you can use is not too much, but that God willed that there be a second person, a human person, involved in our redemption, and that's Mary. If we do not include that, as the document does not clearly include in its many statements, in some way, it seems to reflect more of a Protestant theology of soteriology of redemption than the full Catholic theology that says we were redeemed by a God-man and secondarily by an immaculate woman. And that's why I would encourage prayers, which is, I don't say that lightly, because prayers are the greatest thing I think that can lead to a change, a modification in the document. Prayers for both our Holy Father and for Cardinal Fernandez to consider a critically needed clarification on these doctrinal issues. Also, people are, you have to follow your heart. So many people are responding, saying, what can we do? What should we do? We're so sad. You have to follow your heart in a certain sense. You can certainly write to our Holy Father respectfully always and just express the truth of your heart. If you're feeling that confusion, that frustration, write to him and ask for a clarification and modification in light of consistent papal teaching. And ultimately, we always keep our fundamental and critical obedience to the Papal Magisterium of the Church, especially its clear delineation in encyclicals, apostolic letters, addresses, because that's our beacon, that's our light. We never get off the bark. We always remain faithful and grateful members of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church with a true obedience to clear and definitive teachings by our Holy Father. Thanks so much for being with us. God bless you all.